Good afternoon. Thanks for the introduction. So great to see so many of you in person. So I'm not a very good salesman. I'd actually asked 3 of my colleagues who are actively practicing veterinary medicine in swine production farms to give this talk, and they all turned me down. And the last one said, well, why don't you do it? You have some background in history. So this is what you got. I really want to acknowledge quite a few of my collaborators. A nice part of my extension appointment is I really look at part of what I do is to kind of make sure the information that our fine research team gets out there, that puts out there, gets actually out to producers and then filter concerns and things back. So really want to acknowledge quite a few of these people, obviously all the people in the PIs and the grant, but this group is the ones who work probably most closely in that post-weaning survivability camp. So a lot of what you're going to see is a lot of the fine work that they have done. So a little bit, Ron gave us probably a little bit more updated information, just looking at post-weaning mortality. This is a little bit dated from the project that Ken Stalder and the National Pork Board put together, looking at some industry numbers there. You kind of see it's been pretty flat. You can obviously see the increase that we had during PCV2, and once we got a very effective vaccine, we saw mortality go back down and then start to rise back up. And as Ron showed us earlier this morning, with our current health challenges, still stays pretty flat, maybe even trending up a little bit. So one of the first things that got done was actually Jordan Gebhardt, as he was finishing up his graduate studies, did a really nice series of 2 literature reviews on causes of post-weaning mortality. So you see both the websites up there. I'd encourage you to go ahead and read it, and that's obviously such a big category, he chose to break it down into 2 pieces. So kind of see the boxes there in gray. That's really the things that are more infectious causes of mortality. And then from that, the other section that he chose to do was to go ahead and look at all the non-infectious causes. And he had 2 really nice papers out of that. So several of the key takeaways, some of the interesting things I found about the lit review is he was able to kind of classify them according to all the literature that he reviewed into kind of high impact, medium impact, and maybe more of a lower impact on mortality through some of these non-infectious causes. The infectious ones, that's pretty obvious. We got lots of work to do there, so I really appreciated Dr. Christensen's talk this morning. And I've seen, there's a thing about, we've been working with PRRS for 35 years, and I could say, yeah, been kicking the butts and humbling veterinarians for 35 years. So we got lots of work to do in this area. So what I was trying to think about is, in terms of some successes, are what are some of the things that we've learned or seen either through research in the past, overseas, in the U.S., about things that we can look at today that you could take home today and implement if you haven't already implemented, and expect to see some reduction in mortality. So kind of the first group that he had is some of the ones that were talked about today. Some of the previous speakers, we know the birth weight, weaning age and weaning weight, the pre-weaning management, and seasonality. One thing that Jordan did in one of his papers is he looked at 11 different papers that had been done, looking at all the different causes and factors, and with lots of lots, and put it into a database. And the interesting thing about it, just about all those I identified season. Now that's probably not one we can control as well, but interesting to say that was still a major driver of post-weaning mortality. So the moderate ones, they're probably a little bit more situational dependent. You've got acute abdominal incidents, you've got scrotal and inguinal herniations, rectal prolapses, gastric ulcerations in certain cases, toxins. Certainly we know genetics. We saw some work on that earlier today. The dam parity, obviously some people have tried to utilize parity segregation as an opportunity to maybe divide the population into 2 and allocate the resources appropriately. Obviously, nutritional inadequacy, misformulations, things like that can have an impact on mortality. Barn fill length and sources of pigs are important. I've got a little bit of data to share with you on that. Resource availability, that's one. Stocking density, number of feeders, number of waters, things like that, and sanitation as well. And then kind of in the lower magnitude of overall impact on mortality, but still important ones are things such as group size, transportation, sex. We understand there's differences between gilt and barrows, and I think some people have done some work a little bit with immunological castration and can see some of that benefit bear out when they compare intact males to gilts. Lameness, physical injury, facility, and environmental factors. So I wanted to focus just maybe a little bit on some really great research done on some of those high impact ones, and really kind of dovetails nice into what Dr. Pizarro just talked about previously. This is some work done by DeClercq in 2016. And what I really appreciated about it is he took two different factors, colostrum intake and birth weight both, and then put those together. So across the bottom there, you see the colostrum intake in grams. You've kind of got the mean, the 1 and 2 standard deviations below and above. And then what he did is he split out of all the birth weights that he collected what the kind of average was, and then 1 standard deviation below and 1 standard deviation above on birth weights. And it's really interesting to say, and I think probably dovetails nicely with some of the previous talks, is when we understand looking at that average to even lightweight pig, that's where the real benefit of making sure that we prioritize that colostrum. So I really appreciated Gus's point about that, which is say we need to really be thinking about that as we apply different protocols and split suckle and things like that. We really need to be certainly focused on the lightweight pigs. This is the probability of mortality there on the left-hand side, as you can see, and it certainly, as that pig gets smaller, and if they don't get enough colostrum, we can really see that line really increases. So kind of a nice way to think about that and to try to look at those data together by both those factors. This one, obviously, wean age, that was one that Dr. Main had done some really seminal work at Kansas State when he was a graduate student in 2004, looking at the impact of weaning age on wean to finish mortality, and this one's been done several times, and really the trend line is the same, which really shows a nice linear response to increasing wean age to decreasing mortality. And really some work that had been done that really kind of shows that you can expect to get about a 0.5% improvement in post-weaning mortality for every day of additional wean age. Now, you know, for some people that may result in, okay, I'm going to build extra farrowing barns. For people that may be more constrained on capital, it may be, well, how can I flow my farrowing rooms, or maybe I wean more often. Anything you can do to get that kind of improvement, you know, a 0.5%, and it's very, very consistent, right? Like I say, there's 4 or 5 trials that I've seen, and they all really say the same thing. That's real, that's repeatable type of research that's done. Dr. Boyd had shared some information too, and they had done the same sort of research, but they characterized the differences between looking at poor health flows and then good health flows, and you can see that the response is the same. Obviously, the good health mortality is a little bit lower, and the change in mortality, the change rate for each additional day is a little bit less, but certainly you can see that in both those cases, whether you have unhealthy or healthy pigs, that response is essentially the same. So just looking at some of that resource availability, another one that always impressed me, you know, we have a biological system that has lots of variation, right? So that makes a lot of the research that we look at isn't always very repeatable. But of the stuff I've seen, there's 2 of them that are highly repeatable. One of them is wean age, and the other one is stocking density. So here's a study that was done in 2005, done in a wean to finish barn. Pig started 11 pounds, ran out to 260, and just stocked at 3 different stocking densities. And you can see, you know, a fairly linear improvement, once again, in improving mortality by giving them more space. Now, we understand space and grow finish is very capital intensive, so that was one you have to model economically using the numbers in models like Dr. Schultz had presented this morning, but it's a pretty fairly linear response to that additional space that you're able to give them and the improvement that you get. Here's a data set that I thought was interesting to look at. It basically shows the same overall. What I thought was interesting about this data set is they looked at the differences earlier on. So the blue line there is for the entire finishing period from 60 to 260 pounds. The red line was just taking a peek at that data before those pigs would get where you'd go in there and say, yeah, these pens are kind of tight, right? And what it really, the takeaway for me is I think that impacted stocking density or resource availability happens much earlier than what we think. This is one that was done by Samantha Mailing, which she was a veterinary student at Iowa State University, looking at, and this project actually was looking at oral fluids and a bunch of surveillance, but we happened to capture some site-level data at the same time. And this was a system that was experiencing PRRS, mycoplasma, and even a little bit of APP. And what was really struck me from that, from all that stuff that we looked at was, and put it into a statistical model, was what that impact on stocking density was when you had that combination of pathogens. So you can see, and this was just inadvertently, just because the ebbs and flows that we see in production cycles where you overproduce at certain times, underproduce at other times, you're going to have very different stocking density when you're in a fixed space, fixed time system. So what was just impressive to me was what an impact that those different range in stocking density had on the overall mortality. So as we said, that's something that's not always easy to change. It certainly depends on how much space you have and how many pigs you're producing. But let's talk a little bit about practical stocking density. So I would say, this is probably one pet peeve of mine. You walk in, you've got a completely loaded barn of pigs, and you got these pens that are sitting empty, right? So what are some practical things we can do even if we have a dedicated set number of barns? Well, many times now we've probably gotten away from sorting pigs all the time, but we do a lot of gate cut fills. But as you go in there and you start counting number of pigs as you're starting to do some field research projects, you find out, well, yeah, they all got 28 pigs in them, well, till you start counting them. And then you got a bunch that have 23 and a bunch that have 32. That's practical stocking density to that pig. All he knows is how many pigs he's stocked within that pen. Another one for me probably is the sick pens, right? Well, I had tail biting last time, so I wanted to make sure I had enough pull pens, so I left 8 pens open, right? So what always amazes me is, yeah, we try to utilize them by the time we get to the first cut, but more often than not, we find our pen with our number 1 pigs are going to go to market. They're overstocked, and we've understocked these cull pigs that we may get little or zero value from. So what's just kind of a way to think about, just kind of model that out. When looking at your cull pens, you say, okay, well, I've got 40 pens in my barn, and if they're all healthy, I can put them at 7.5 square feet. And we saw from those previous research, we'd expect that the mortality is going to be a lot lower in them. Well, maybe if we take 4, we're going to have 4 cull pens, right? Well, even 4 cull pens in a 1,000 pig building, if you assume that you're about 187.5 square feet in each one of those pens, now you've dropped that effective stocking density for the pigs that you're intending to grow and sell there. You drop them to 6.75, and if we get into that extreme situation where you've got a grower, it's like, I don't want to run out of sick pens. I'm going to make sure I've got 8 open pens. Well, now you're effectively stocking those at 6 square feet, and yeah, we can say, well, wait till marketing and we'll reshuffle, but as you saw from the previous slide, we're starting to see impacts on stocking density much long before we're getting ready to pull the first pigs out of those barns. So that certainly is an area, that you can kind of take home and think about, is like, how do we really manage that, and what are we potentially doing, and not only to post-weaning mortality, but to also average daily gain and feed conversion, which are also affected by those same type of stocking densities. Maybe another success is as we've been moving to wean to finish, nursery finishing, there's been several different data sets. I just kind of pulled the one that I had out there, and you can certainly see in this case is here looking at this productivity data, there's about a 2 to 3% when you compare nursery finishing combined to wean to finish buildings in mortality. More observations from farms that had either did before and after or had some of both. Maybe it's a little bit closer to 1 to 1.5, but you're also not washing though. You're not paying to transport those pigs. You're not going to wash that building as often. And actually some work that was done by Pete Lasley, a veterinarian I worked with at Smithfield when he was a grad student, looked at ileitis, the timing of ileitis infection between nursery and finishing and wean to finish, and essentially showed in the nursery to finishing, because we get them all up and mix them all together, we saw infection with Lawsonia much earlier than those true wean to finishes once they were placed in there. So that's just some of those dynamics I think that we probably don't completely appreciate, but I think it probably explains part of this differential that we see between true wean to finish and the nursery to finishing ones. This probably goes without saying, but there's been several database studies looking at taking all those lot closeouts, putting them into a statistical model, and saying, what are my top 3 or top 5 reasons that can really explain the variation in growing pig mortality. This is one that Dr. Lynn Harris and his grad student Edison had done with one large production system, taking all their lots. And he's got a much more detailed model that he may share in the session tomorrow. I had asked him one just to kind of isolate what we thought maybe was the sow source effect. So he just looked at sow source, their purr status, and mycoplasma status, and essentially looked like the correlation there was 0.66, so about 66% of that variation could be explained by the sow source itself. So, we talk about pig density and lateral movements, of diseases, and all that's important, but what it really, firms home is that the value of having a good clean pig coming out of those sow farms, and a little bit more of that data really kind of pulls that home. They took that same database then and isolated some certain things to maybe look at those health reasons a little bit closer. That system does monitoring with processing fluids and family oral fluids. So for each lot, each week of pigs weaned out of each farm, they have a status on those pigs. So what you essentially see there is what you would kind of expect, right? PRRS negative and maybe PRRS stable farms were pretty close, but those unstable farms were much higher. Well, they looked at mycoplasma status because the status was doing some mycoplasma eliminations. We saw a little bit bigger delta there, which was maybe a little bit unexpected, which we saw even comparing, sorry, my thing keeps moving here. The stable farms, were about 1% higher than those that are truly negative, and then another percent higher than that in mycoplasma unstable finishing flows. So undoubtedly, we know that disease from the sow farm really still drives a lot of that variation in grow finish production. They'd also had taken some of the case reports and from each of the lots that they did case workups in, and just characterized looking at some differences between combinations. So you see one at the bottom there is PRRS negative and no diagnosis of strep. In those systems, they ran about 9% in those lots. Ones were, excuse me, that were PRRS negative but streptococcus positive, were just about a little over 1% higher. Obviously weren't as many of those, only 25 in this subset analysis. Those that were PRRS positive and strep negative were higher than that, added another percent, and then those that were PRRS and strep both were about 1.5% higher than those that were PRRS positive and no strep diagnosed with them. So you can really see some of the impact of those disease interactions. Maybe one success, as I tried to think about successes, maybe even over the last 2 to 3 years, has been mycoplasma pneumoniae elimination. We saw from the previous slide that even in stable farms, there's certainly a cost to that. Work done by Dr. Yeski and some other systems have certainly showed that even in a stable system, even having the positive status could be worth anywhere from $4 to $5 per pig marketed. The nice part about it was once we had a little bit better method of exposure and then a little bit better method of monitoring, we found that those systems, particularly in combination with PRRS closures, got to be very, very effective. So, there's various papers and protocols out there looking at booster vaccinations, intentional exposures, both at the sow farm and gilts at closure, and that was kind of the one that Dr. Yeski had come up with, taking the foggers to fog those animals to ensure that they were infected, particularly as gilts, to be very effective. And then combinations of medications and pulses in the feed or water to the sows along with laryngeal swab. I mean, that is really, and you can really see where there's probably starting to get to be upwards near of 7-figure sows here in the U.S. that have gone through or are going through mycoplasma pneumoniae elimination. So one other thing that looked at, certainly talked a little bit earlier today about the use of antibiotics. So one of the studies that we got funded at the same time we put the survivability project together, this was one that we identified, which was really looking at different protocols for treating multifactorial respiratory disease outbreaks and reducing nursery mortality. So we had the opportunity, worked with a producer in a field study. We took a nursery that they had and did some modifications to some rooms so that we could individually change the water at the individual pen level. And we compared 4 different treatments. So at the time of the disease outbreak, once it was diagnosed, we had one treatment that we would just go in and mass inject those with an antibiotic. Second treatment were pens that only got antibiotics through the water. None of them were injected. The third treatment was just going through each day and just treating the sick pigs, so more of a spot injection or a targeted injection treatment. And then the fourth one was looking at maybe which was considered to be more of a baseline, which would be, hey, we put something in the water and then we go through and just treat the sick affected pigs. So we did that, and then we measured mortality, weight gain, culls, lightweight pigs, individual treatment success, things like that. So that was one we wanted to evaluate, say, are there any differences in these complicated respiratory disease situations? Could we see differences by those routes? What we really saw was there was no statistical difference. So what you see there is the results of 2 different turns through that nursery. The blue one, the one there in blue, were pigs that were identified with influenza, and then the bacterial secondaries of strep, Glasserella parasuis, which was the old Haemophilus parasuis, and Mycoplasma hyarinus. And that one, there was no PRRS diagnosed in that, so you can see the overall mortality was fairly low for that 8-week nursery turn, and there was no statistically significant differences between them. We came back with the next, the next turn, and a little bit different flow, and we had PRRS, 2 strains of influenza, an H1 and an H3, and then all the bacterial secondaries. And we can see that the overall mortality was higher, but once again, there was no difference between any of those different treatment routes. And we certainly observed a lot of high temperatures. We were attempting to do some FDA-type clinical cure rate measurements, which gets to be really difficult when you have severe viral challenges because rectal temperatures is one of the primary responses. So really, it's kind of bringing us to, as we're thinking in the future, boy, it doesn't look like there's really any differences. Now, we didn't have any negative controls where they didn't receive any antibiotics. But do we need to, on these complicated virals, should we be thinking more about working on anti-inflammatories? Do we need to be doing more of that? Because you and I know when we get any number of viruses, our first response is to take Motrin, not go grab an antibiotic off the shelf, which we can't get anyway. So those are just some of the things that we've learned. Successes, maybe more, I don't really want to say failures. I tend to think more about opportunities. This is probably the biggest one. You're going to hear Dr. Daryl Holtkamp will talk in the breakout tomorrow about some research that he's doing on growing pig biosecurity and some of his thoughts and observations from the outbreak investigations, which is really say that's probably our single biggest opportunity in growing pig mortality. I would say probably one of them, obviously the biggest one would be the disease status, but this is probably the one that's right next to the line. If we look at risk factors there, we're looking at market pig sanitation, dead stock removal, lateral transmission, feed and feed deliveries, maintenance personnel. All those probably serve as vectors that we need to really think about and consider. How do we make some potential for some opportunity to improve growing pig mortality simply by getting a better handle on our growing pig biosecurity. So this is some more information by the Swine Disease Reporting System. So that's Dr. Giovanni Trevason out of Dr. Lynn Harris's group. So it's a standalone report generated from the 6 major diagnostic laboratories that measure any number of things, but this is just kind of showing, PRRS challenges and how that growing pig may actually serve as a reservoir. So what you see here is data from each month, 2019 through 2021. And what I've kind of highlighted in the green circles there is you can certainly see that we start to see an increase in positivity around this time of year in the growing pigs, and then 2 to 6 weeks later we start to see sow farm outbreaks. So we probably see a similar pattern with PED and other enteric coronaviruses, but it's really to say that's our area of opportunity. We know we're doing a lot better job with biosecurity on the sow farms, but if we're not addressing anything out in that grow finish, we could be creating a lot of the situations that we're having with PRRS in the sow farms simply because we've just got too much virus circulating out in the growing pig arena. So this is some more information from that reporting system. This is looking at the 144 variant line 1C, so you can see the massive outbreak kind of this spring, and now we're starting to went down in this summer, July and August, and now we're getting into October. We're starting to see an increase in that. Certainly, another thing with PRRS, what we've seen is we've put together some fairly effective ways to control that disease, probably not eliminate it, but what it almost feels like is the better we get with that, we force that virus to evolve into one that evades that, can hide out longer in a sow farm, can create a virus that is much more deadly, spread a lot more in aerosols. And what you're seeing here is through their PRRS outbreak management program that they have some herds enrolled in, you can just really see we have created a bigger, faster, meaner PRRS virus. So you can look at the total losses per 1,000 sows. That's what those bars are, and you can see the 144 variant certainly is a lot bigger than 174, which is bigger than or has more losses than other strains. If we looked at here, just isolating these different lineages, looking at lineages 1A, 1C, the 1C variant, and then 1H, you can see once again that the variant 1C has a lot higher total losses than any of those other 144 strains that we have. So this is probably a little bit more from Cesar Mora. That's another one of Dr. Lynn Harris's grad students. Some of his graduate work here was actually looking at 1 dose versus 2 dose of PRRS vaccine in some field demonstrations. This one always kind of struck me kind of really interesting, which was to say they did oral fluids every 3 to 4 weeks, and what you essentially see is plotting the number of times that they detected PRRS wild virus in those pigs to the mortality, and you can see the more times, the more strains that we detect, the higher our mortality is. So for each additional strain that they found, mortality jumped by about 1%, and those are strains that were not native to the sow farm. So it certainly just tells you the amount of lateral transmission of that virus that we have in growing pigs, probably with some of our deficiencies in grow finish biosecurity. Just more of that data, splitting it out between his primary treatment, which was looking at 1 full dose of vaccine compared to 2 full doses, and you see that same overall trend, but you do see some differences in mortality by those couple of different interventions there. Another one, Dr. Gebhardt and the team at K-State got involved with doing some of the SHIC work in Vietnam. So they looked at trying to find where the contamination was. Now, certainly they didn't find it very often. 17 out of 2,328 samples from the feed supply chain, had ASF DNA in it. But if you really look at where those are mostly concentrated, you see most of them are feed trucks, mill surface, so non-feed contact areas, and people, right? So it's really just to kind of say that's probably an area, and I know they've done this with Seneca virus and other viruses as well, which is really say, feed mill biosecurity is probably another area of focus, particularly for that growing pig biosecurity that we need to be looking at. Dr. Holtkamp had done a little bit of research looking at ways to kind of minimize some of that transmission. This was just kind of a compilation of him and his grad student, Chelsea Rustin. They looked at stage loading. So if you kind of look up to the right, you've got the driver, he's kind of in his zone. You've got an intermediary person, so you essentially have 2 lines of separation and a buffer zone, and then you got the people in the barns. And what you see there is the glow germ, right? So they put the glow germ down, they do load pigs, and then they go in with the UV light and shine where they are, and then they've got a square that they count all the number of glow germ particles that they can find. So essentially what you see is they've compared the stage loading to conventional on the left there. So before the second line of separation, you really don't see any differences between that, but as you get further out and away from that into the barn, you certainly see a difference. You see a lot more incidences of finding that glow germ in the stage loading than you did in the conventional loading. And you can just see a couple of pictures. They just put that the glow germ in the back of the transportation truck, so you can just see how often that gets all over the chutes and on the panels and all that. So kind of a nice biosecurity training tool as well. If we think about maybe futures, things we need to be thinking about from a biosecurity standpoint, probably in particular we start thinking about ASF, right? So this was interesting. We had a speaker, a veterinarian who worked in a large production system in Russia, came to speak at the 2019 Iowa State Swine Disease Conference, and just to share what were some of the biosecurity things that they had to change in response to ASF. And she really kind of talked about this fortress concept, right? So you can see some of the things that they did, and obviously they had to spend a lot of capital to do it. You can see truck washes, drive-through truck washes. You see the people getting out, surveillance cameras everywhere, incinerators or freezers to store mortality, and then transfer it, through a transfer chute to an off-site, location or system to haul the deads away. There you see in the lower right, all the pigs that get moved in or out of that fortress is through a transfer chute, and then you can see the fences as well. The most interesting thing about that certainly was that was effective at preventing ASF breaks, but the side benefit that they saw is they saw about a 20% improvement in their pigs per sow per year from putting all these things into place. And none of that was related to ASF outbreaks. It was that, hey, we just saw less PRRS and less myco and less influenza and all that. So I think for me, it was just to take home to say, while certainly that would be expensive, that's the kind of stuff we need to start thinking about. We've got ASF in the Caribbean. We found in the 2 countries that tested, there's a whole bunch of countries down there that don't test, and we know that, that's not very far away from the southern part of the U.S. So one thing I really appreciated about Jordan and some of the work that the guy's done, certainly when I was in day out practice, trying to figure out a better way to make some product or animal health decisions. So they've kind of come up with some neat tools listed here about trying to decide if we're going to go ahead and do research on products that may improve mortality. They've got a couple of different models, whether you use half a barn or you use individual pens per barn, different ways about depending on how big of your mortality difference is, how many barns you might need to do that. You know, he shared a little bit too, you know, it kind of depends on where your experimental unit is. You want to minimize the variation between those sites, you know, having that controlled research. In those having dedicated personnel, the same person to do that all day long, and have somebody who that's their job to do research. Don't ask the farm people to do research. Their job is to take care of the pigs. But certainly, you know, that group there, you know, Dr. Lynn Harris, Dr. Gustavo Silva, our group here, we're really interested if you want any help in trying to how to set these up to get that done, to answer the questions. I really think that's important to do that if you're going to spend the time, effort, and money to do research. Let us help you if we can to make sure that's being done right. Just kind of in closing, the neat thing about this conference, we're really excited about and a little bit bummed about the COVID 1-year delay, is this is a conference where we need your input. So tomorrow morning, as you're coming to the different sessions, we really encourage you, like you say, Joel said, there's anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. We want to hear from you, right? Part of the idea was to do this on year 2 already, because we obviously had some projects that were already in the works, but we wanted feedback on what else should we be working on for years 3, 4, 5. Well, now we're down to years 4 and 5. So please come to those sessions. Please, during that time, anything that you might be working on, that you've heard, or things that you think we ought to be focusing on as that group, we really want to hear from you. You know, some of the things we've talked about internally, you know, feels like from a disease standpoint, you know, we deal with viruses all day in, day out, all day long, right? So do we need to start looking at compounds that may serve as antivirals, antibiotics, and anti-inflammatories, maybe to do a little bit better targeted use? You know, is there any application with the new vaccine technologies out there that we need to be looking at? You know, there's a lot of precision livestock, so I appreciated Dr. Christensen using the gilt, using cameras and technologies. Is there opportunities for us to look at reducing that post-weaning mortality using that, management techniques, nutrition, disease, interaction research, any of that's open. We just want to hear from you tomorrow. So with that, I appreciate your time and look forward to hearing from you tomorrow during those sessions.
We have time for a question or two. Does anybody have a pressing one? I think we're saving them all for tomorrow.
They got it all figured out, right? One in the back.
The question was, did the fortress concept in Russia overcome, the expenses of that overcome or pay for itself with the 20% savings in PSY?
Yeah, great question. I didn't think to ask that one, and part of it is they were going to do that anyway for ASF, so it was really just an observation. But I imagine, you know, that would be one if you went back and took your models and we could get some costs for you. That's probably something we could certainly utilize Dr. Schultz's partial budgets to be able to figure out what that payback looks like. Because you're right, none of that was cheap.